Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back another video from Totally Not Mark, and today we are checking out the genius of Dragon Ball, the anatomy of manga. So let's just get into that. I've got nothing to say on the intro.
This is a page taken from the Dragon Ball manga, and I'm willing to wager that despite my cropping out of the backgrounds and filling in each individual character completely black, you can not only still tell what's happening, but you might also be able to pick up on how the characters are feeling, and more than that, if you're a fan of Dragon Ball.
That's Raditz, that's Piccolo, that's Goku, Piccolo, Goku, Raditz.
You know exactly what scene this is,
Yeah.
too. This is due to clever character design philosophy in part, but if I told you that there were dozens of other techniques being implemented simultaneously before your eyes that you weren't aware of, would you believe me?
No. Go on, convince me.
Because while it seems the masses accept that Dragon Ball's artistic and visual approach rules, if you ask someone why Dragon Ball's art is so good, that's when you get awkward answers like, it looks cool, or
looks good,
the action is sick, or damn, Android 16 hella thick. And no matter how true those statements
Hell yeah.
might be, they don't really answer the aforementioned question. Why is Dragon Ball's paneling, composition, structure, the artwork so appealing to such a wide audience?
Akira Toriyama's just genius.
Why is it that when I look at this highly edited page with no text or context clues,
Still know what's
I can
going
still
on.
tell what the characters are feeling and generally what's happening on the page at a glance? Well, the answers may surprise you and give you a whole new appreciation for Akira Toriyama because while One Piece is second to none when it comes to story writing, when it comes to shonen visuals, Dragon Ball owns that finish line.
Well, One Piece's problem is the amount of text that they throw in on the panel. Sometimes the paneling's a bit off. Sometimes with Oda.
I'm
Oh, this is
Totally Not
cool.
Mark, and welcome to the Anatomy of Manga: How Dragon Ball and Akira Toriyama Mastered Visual Storytelling.
Cool. Cool opening.
I'm going to be referencing books for this video, lots and lots of books. So if you're not too familiar
I thought with that text that was a Sonic book at some point, some sort.
with the fundamentals of comic book design, I recommend checking these out if you're interested. But don't worry, I've written this video so that even my mother can understand, and she thinks Vegeta's a type of soup. So, when you open up a manga, you'll see pictures.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock.
Now, mind-blowing insight aside, it's how a mangaka chooses to present their images that dictates how successful their stories ultimately become.
Okay,
and
yeah.
so, the question is, how do they decide what pictures to draw, where to put them, and why? Well, believe it
Yeah, what's the idea behind the placements and that? You got to be able to follow the narrative as round as well, haven't you?
or not, there's a whole long list of principles and psychological techniques that have been tested over many decades, passed down from generation to generation. Techniques that I, a layman, have carefully broken down into 4 beefy sections for your viewing pleasure.
Really?
So, let's kick things off with one of the easier concepts.
It's a tiny piece of paper. Okay, that's all it is.
Part 1. Clarity. Clarity is the name of the game in this first section, and as famed author, illustrator, and all-around chick magnet Scott McCloud puts it, storytellers want 2 things from their audiences.
Okay.
We want them to understand what we have to tell them, and we want them to care enough to stick around till we're done.
So to understand, to want to stay. So we need to get what's happening. We need to be engrossed.
To achieve that first goal, you need to learn the principles of communication with clarity. Communication with clarity means making reader comprehension your ultimate goal. Due to their sequential and abstract nature, a manga is massively dependent on its visuals. Because of this, you might think that since books don't have a visual component to their presentation, that a manga has a clear advantage. Wrong! Because bad visuals can actually make a great story worse. If the page is confusing, the artist risks the reader making a mistake, missing out on a key piece of information, potentially resulting in them having a lesser experience, or at worst, dropping the comic entirely. Not
doing
good,
that.
right?
Don't
So,
wanna be doing that.
while basic, without clarity taken into consideration when composing your pages, your comic's visuals might be actively working against your story rather than just simply doing nothing. However, as you saw at the beginning of this video, Akira Toriyama had no such issues. In fact, even if we removed practically every secondary detail, including the
Still
narrative itself,
works.
we can still on some level understand what exactly is going on. How did Toriyama, the perverted boob drawing tax evading whiz kid,
Whoa, okay.
Managed to make his pages so clear. Well, in order to understand that, we have to ditch these nerdy books for a second and look at the manga once again and pray to the fair use gods while doing so for educational purposes. Yay. Let's use Raditz as an example one last time. This is Raditz's first encounter with Piccolo. These two pages represent the beginning and climax of their meeting. As you can see, I've decided to print off the original Japanese version of this manga, and I've done so because I want you not to focus on what's being said, but instead to focus on what's being shown to
Hey, cool. All right, I appreciate that. That's classy. Yeah.
to you. But first, I want to try to get across to you a relatively simple concept. And to do that, I'm going to use these images. What do you think
Rorschach drawings. Okay.
these are? Anyone?
I don't know.
How about now? Yeah, right? Much clearer. And you can feel that immediate understanding in comparison to the first, where you had to stop and think, right? Well, that moment of pause should not happen if the manga you're reading has clarity of form at the very least.
Ooh, wow, okay, yeah.
In our day-to-day lives, we have the ability to adjust our points of view to get more information. However, not so for our little comic writer friend here. Careful and intentional choices must be made when constructing your panels on the page, so that much like these two images, a potential reader can understand with just a quick glance.
Yeah.
In order for Akira Toriyama to achieve this desired effect, his characters seldom share page space with those that look identical to them, unless it's on purpose, and that's the joke. I mean, if you really think about it, all the different duos and groups he's presented in the past, Vegeta and Nappa, Frieza flanked by Zarbon and Dodoria, Android 19 and 20, Deborah and Babidi, Boss Rabbit, all of those characters offer vastly different designs to those that they stand alongside. Toriyama does this to emphasize his character's defining features. In the case of Piccolo, on this page, his silhouette is defined by his ears, antennae, clothing, and even his hand in some cases. Each of those aspects of him help to serve his character's unique shape. Okay. But what about Namek, I hear you belching from afar? He looks the same as them. First of all, racist. Secondly, don't ever interrupt me again. And thirdly, Toriyama made sure that all of them were either dead, horizontal, or somewhere else in the various scenes that Piccolo was present in. The only duo that really looks similar in shape are Android 17 and 18, and they were his rushed fallback plan when his editor moaned about the awesome looking 19 and 20 not being enough. But that's enough of my correct opinion shared for now. Back to the cartoons. On these pages, the person Piccolo shares space with, Raditz, is set apart through his spiky, all-encompassing hair. However, purposeful character design isn't the only way he can visually communicate to us. In fact, we're just tipping the iceberg here. And on the topic of tipping, let's talk balance. Have you ever wondered why oftentimes anime characters look as though they're struggling with vertigo? Well, tilting one way or falling over completely at the behest of a poorly timed gag. Yeah. It seems that this is a practice that, while not rooted fully in the real world, has taken a hold of this industry as a staple of its production. But there is a reason for that. While it's great your reader can identify the character at a glance now, that alone doesn't tell a story. What can, however, is emotion and action. Okay, yeah. Two things Dragon Ball is not in short supply of, thankfully. And so I introduce to you triangles. Ta-da! Okay. I sense you might be a bit confused, so allow me to explain. You see, while ogres are like onions, characters are like triangles. This was a principle first posited, as far as I know, by American illustrator Harold von Schmidt, pictured here dressed like Indiana Jones 64 years before Indiana Jones. That's right, this picture's 103 years old. Whoa. He explains with diagrams drawn on what I can only assume were cave walls at the time, that typically speaking, as humans we are conditioned to feel a certain way when looking at these three triangles in different positions. With the first firmly planted on the ground, we feel a sense of stability. With the second, there's a sense of unease created. An unstable and tenuous line stands between its current state and a violent end through said instability. In other words, it creates a bit of anticipation and tension. And finally, with the third triangulum, we see something is off balance, and so understand there's a chance it might fall, leading to a sense of action and danger created. This is all a bit abstract and frankly too nerdy even for me, which is saying something. So let's go back and look at the pretty pictures of the weird alien men throwing lights at each other. Yes. If we treat these characters like the triangles from the old man's cave drawings, we very quickly begin to understand the principles at play here and how they serve the visual story of this confrontation. The first panel is Piccolo's establishing shot, within which we see his normal, grumpy but confident self, plotting no doubt to do more naughty things to Goku. And look, he's standing upright in a stable position just like the triangle.
Okay, alright, I'm Okay, yeah, this is really cool.
Good job, Dr. Jones. Continuing down the page, we see this principle holds true throughout the engagement, to reflect the various characters' mental states. Piccolo's stance, however, is compromised and set off balance immediately after sensing Raditz' approach, suggesting Piccolo can't handle the big spiky alien man. Probably the most interesting application of this technique in this short section comes from Piccolo attempting to subvert this reaction he's had by composing himself once again through false bravado, standing upright. But we all know, reading this, that Piccolo's bluffing because of the way he was standing prior, before bringing the conflict to a roaring conclusion with a big blast from Piccolo to Raditz. And so, if you direct your attention to the final panel, does Raditz's stance shift even slightly off balance?
No.
Not one bit. Not a bad introduction through body language, in my opinion. And just because I'm exhausted from looking at Raditz's stupid face, let's look at other examples of all the techniques discussed thus far on a page I like to call Goku's first of many long naps. Every single character on this page looks distinct. You have Roshi's character outline differentiated by the similarly bald Krillin, and Piccolo thanks to the staff he always carries around with him. Piccolo's ears once again help to distinguish his character outline, and characters like Goku, Krillin, Gohan, and indeed Bulma are all assuming poses that inform the other and grant us plenty of visual information. Jump ahead further and you'll see Goku's initial attempt to catch Bubbles. Bubbles, clearly waltzing around as if floating on air, is almost reclined in his upward stance, while Goku heavy-footedly stomps his slanting self towards the hairy elf-ape monster. Until he has an idea, that is. With new conviction, Goku stands as straight up as he can, struggles to get his kid off, until finally we see a lighter version of him that, while still standing off to one side and slightly precarious on his tippy toes, is clearly more stable than he once was towards the beginning of this encounter. This is all to say, carefully and intentionally designing the silhouettes of your characters to remain distinct from one another is important. Selecting the more easily readable angles to convey their unique shapes is very important. And finally, illustrating their poses in such a manner that it conveys the emotions of the characters and the rhythm of the story at hand, which unfortunately is a principle so seldom spoken about I consider it a hate crime against books. These fundamentals and basic principles of illustration serve to increase overall clarity, which is always a good thing, but also gives each manga a chance at survival. Many of you in my audience would have no reason to know this, but it's worth keeping in mind that the paper quality these chapters are initially released with are about as enduring as Gohan's main character run in the series. That is to say,
yeah, they're not. It's not that high quality with the Shonen Jump magazine, isn't it? Like, and then when it's put into the mangas, it's better quality.
Not at all. You'd make better paper trying to duct tape sawdust together, as thin and brittle as half-ply toilet paper that was left out in the sun to dry. No. This means, in addition to my old weekly Shonen Jumps all looking like they have book leprosy, for an artist, particularly a mangaka in Japan, understanding these fundamentals is not just good practice, it's vital for survival in a format produced on terrible quality paper for audiences with very short attention spans. Alright, so now that we know the most foundational concepts, let's start building our understanding up with different concepts. Let's start looking at the exciting stuff. Part 2.
Sequence. Okay.
Now that we're after moving on to the really big boy material, it's time for me to crush your enthusiasm and interest by showing you this graph and these visual aids. How awful and cruel a teacher I am. Only kidding, graphs are for nerds. I'm a 31-year-old YouTuber talking about comic book design. I have no room to complain. Anyway, the image I shared just now that looked like a bunch of scary ink splotches.
Okay, intriguing.
Monsters is in fact an assortment of object placement schemes for shots or panels. And that's a fancy way of saying a sheet of potential page compositions. Composition, as a term, is basically what makes a picture look right, or as a nerd would put it, composition means the distribution and placement of forms, shapes, colors, and values to produce a unified and harmonious whole.
It's like why everything is where it is.
But I would never say that because I am not a robot or a Google. A common way to describe or define manga and comics in shorthand might look something like this: sequential art. Coined by comic artist Will Eisner, pictured here dressed like your grandpa after getting lost at Comic-Con, he describes comics as an art form that uses images deployed in a specific order for the purposes of graphic storytelling. Or TLDR, don't those lovely pictures tell a lovely story? In our friend Scott McCloud's book, Making Comics, Storytelling Secrets of Comics, Manga, and Graphic Novels, try saying that 10 times fast, he outlines a host of different practices and rules one might abide by when sequencing a comic strip. And I'll be discussing two of those practices right here today. Choice of moment moment and choice of flow, otherwise known as what I want to show and how I want to show it.
Okay, yeah, I like how you simplify it. So, choice of moment, the idea of what you want to do, choice of flow, like literally how you're going to portray it. Alright, okay.
Let's do the moment one first because it happens in the book first, and it feels weird for me to write a video about this technique where I don't follow exactly what the book says. So, yeah, where was I? Choice of moments speaks to the idea that when laying out your images that tell a specific story, these moments should be like connect the dot puzzle pieces. Okay. Remove one dot of that sequence and you end up changing the shape of the story being told. Effectively, choice of moment is how one organizes and chooses to illustrate their particular sequence. Okay. Each moment requires a different approach. Highlighting or placing focus on a small moment in time requires a different structure and philosophical approach to each sequence or specific action. What does this mean and or look like? Well, let's start from the most subtle and work our way up from there. The first and most subtle type of sequence is called moment to moment. And while not the most common approach, it's certainly pervasive in Dragon Ball. And my god, does it know how to leave an impact. Okay. Typically, moment to moment is used to heighten the drama with a more cinematic motion to the page. Notice the way Goku goads Frieza into shooting a beam directly at his face only to just slowly raise his head afterwards like a badass. And that thing right there, that slow and gradual movement that helps make Goku look like a badass, that's moment-to-moment paneling. Right. These are snapshots in time, captured by the panelists to highlight one or more of the following: to heighten the drama, the cinematic nature of the scene, and to Duncan Frieza because he's a psychotic, slumpy dildo racist.
So it's like very slow to, you know, we know that's a slower moment to be cool. Like, so you were to take that and animate it, you know that's meant to be a slow moment because it's moment to moment paneling. Okay.
As I mentioned, sequencing like this isn't used everywhere, but instead sparingly to create a specific effect, whether that be for dramatic purposes like with Frieza just now, to emphasize a subtle aspect of the story like Gohan curling up into a ball and falling asleep, or as Toriyama loves to do, place great emphasis on a particular joke. Moving on to the opening page of chapter 212, we are given our first glimpse of what will soon become one of Goku's most iconic techniques, the Genki Dama, or Spirit Bomb as it's referred to by people who hate it when I call it the Genki Dama. As you can see on this page, we have a collection of subtle movements. Because of this, you might be led to believe or assume that this is our good old friend moment to moment. But you'd be wrong. This is a different beast entirely. This, my friends, is called action to action. The compositional Batman to moment's Robin. This guy does all the heavy lifting in most manga's action sequences. Instead of focusing on a specific movement in detail, action to action contends with displaying a single subject. In this case, Goku moving through a series of actions. And yes, while the movements are small, like the Frieza chin beam, wasn't that cool. Altogether, they tell a more complicated story here with Goku. A clear example of action to action can be seen with this save Piccolo makes on Gohan with the Cybermen in chapter 216. From the thwarted surprise attack to the counter attack, throw, and subsequent final attack, result being the Cyberman is dead and Gohan is safe once again thanks to his big green daddy Pickles. And in the same way Piccolo might cut off an attack, counter, and eventually destroy his opponent, this sequence introducing the Genki Dama is constructed in a very similar fashion. For in the same way, if you remove one or more of those panels from the sequence with Piccolo, making the save on Gohan, you lose information that changes how the scene or story plays out. With this slow and subtle dance Goku does with his arms on this page, as readers we are all receiving a vital sequence of actions we must understand if we are to grasp the essence of this technique as it exists within the story. And you thought it was just as simple as drawing cool pictures. How wrong you were. Whoa. With moment-to-moment transitions like I demonstrated earlier through the likes of Frieza, while they offer oftentimes special emphasis for drama, a gag, or catching small changes, pieces of them can be removed that, while compromising the atmosphere of the page and the punchline of a joke, usually doesn't result in the destruction or shape change of the story as a whole. I can remove one of these panels of Goku looking cool in that scene with Frieza, and while the drama is lessened thanks to the sense of motion created being compromised, there aren't consequences for the greater narrative. No vital piece of information is necessarily lost.
Yeah, we still get what's happened, but this adds to it.
And just like the Piccolo sequence, the same, however, cannot be said for this Genki Dama sequence. Each individual panel on this page is pivotal to our understanding of this technique's shortcoming. A shortcoming that is pivotal for readers to understand as the story progresses against the naughty spiky boy later on. And yet, interestingly, for a sequence that's so important, Save for a word or two, there's virtually no meaningful dialogue. So what exactly is being communicated then, if not verbally? Well, let's take a look. Panel 1 is an establishing shot of Goku gathering energy. Panel 2, Goku realizes he has enough energy for the bomb. Panel 3, he holds it. Panel 4, focuses it. And finally, Panel 5, controls it. This page quite literally dedicates each panel to an individual step in creating a spirit bomb. Assume this pose to gather energy. Register when you have enough, hold it, focus it, and finally control it. Remove any one of these panels and the message here is lost. Take away panel 4 and you'd innocently assume that this technique can be used as easily as a Kamehameha. Remove panel 2 and you justifiably conclude that this technique doesn't require concentration or time to charge. The Genki Dama is a slow charge attack that places the wielder in a vulnerable position, and each one of these panels outlines a specific aspect of the attack for us to consider without words.
And this is action to action, isn't it? Right, yeah.
And now that we understand that, let's talk choice of flow, or flow for short. In other words, now that you have a story that you want to tell in pictures, how should you draw these pictures or panel them on a page to create an interesting flow that helps the pictures communicate the story to the reader? And this, believe it or not, is the hard part. But as I found out while researching this video, Akira Toriyama had a lot of experience in this specific area before ever becoming a mangaka. It turns out he actually began his career as an illustrator designing advertisements, which meant in order to be effective at his job, he needed to be well versed in directing a viewer or reader's attention in a very controlled and intentional fashion. This trick Toriyama is trying to play here is to guide you from panel to panel, tell you information and not make it feel like work, not make it feel like reading. And that last part, it's hard, but he does it, and to show you how, we need to take an even closer look at this Genki Dama page. The first panel is a downward wide shot with emphasis being placed on the hands. A wide shot is one that encompasses the whole body, but the emphasis quite clearly here in this panel is placed on Goku's hands. This is what we are being told to pay attention to. This is what Goku is using to control this technique. Using the ink lines surrounding Goku in panel 1, our eyes are guided to the second in the sequence unconsciously. This is the only panel Goku's hand or hands are out of the shot, or more specifically, pushed out of the shot. This is done intentionally to draw attention momentarily away from Goku's hands and onto Goku's face. The keen focus that's required to register when enough energy has been gathered, our eyes are drawn to a sudden spark.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's as if Goku's hands like that is then pushing our focus to that to then flow back down. Yeah.
Signaling to us Goku is ready to proceed, and using the lines in this panel, Toriyama once again guides our eyes downward. The hands are now lowered in panel 3 back into frame. Energy emitting from all around his body. Goku's right hand, our left, is positioned higher than the other hand in the panel, and again, this is a measured decision. Like I said with panel 1, Toriyama has told us that Goku's hands are indeed the focus, and so this is what our eye trail looks like. See how when we go from panel to panel, we follow the hands until suddenly in panel 4, our attention is thrown downwards just like Goku's hands to the lower left corner. So cool. This, along with the medium upshot that Toriyama chose, is working to create this sense that between panels 3 and 4, Goku threw his hands down in an effort to concentrate this massive surge of energy to one fixed point. The energy is no longer emanating from his body, but instead his arm, and more specifically, his hand. And finally, because our eyes are drawn to this hand, this limb of Goku's guides our eyes to the next and final panel on the page, right onto, yep, you guessed it, Goku's hand one last time. Now a closed fist indicating he has control of the energy. From there, our eyes glance over Goku's expression as he offers a reassuring smirk before saying,
he's done it.
Okay, I'm all set. Creating anticipation for what's to come on the next page. All of it is communicated in just 5 panels. And look, I understand I just spent a couple of minutes going over this, but I want to reiterate that all of this is communicated in just 5 panels. Something that would otherwise take me an afternoon to fully realize and compose myself came flowing out of Toriyama like blood from Roshi's nose.
Nice.
Haha, reference. So you thought that all there was to manga was pretty pictures and fun writing? Absolutely not. More than a director in a director's chair, Toriyama needs to be his own producer, cinematographer, writer, character designer, fight choreographer, illustrator, etc. The idea that he not only did this for every page unconsciously, but did so for over 10 years while releasing a new chapter every week is honestly mind-blowing to me in the most humbling of ways.
It's cool that he can just keep doing that for so long, stick into it, you know, because he could have got to a point where it's like, right, it's popular now, I can just like relax on how I choose the flow of the panels, or when I choose my moment-to-moment actions, moment-to-moment bits and paneling, and yeah.
And hilariously, to this day, he's still the same. Toyotaro has even gone on the record describing how pernickety Toriyama still is about how a gag is paneled in Dragon Ball Super, and I can see why. And while impressive when I break this down in an academic sense, if Toriyama does it right, the readers won't have time to notice because they will be caught up in the story. Everything I described should be understood or covered by the eye in quite literally a few seconds. All of that information that would have otherwise taken pages of boring dialogue to describe were instead shown to us in a much more concise fashion. And this is why great panel sequence and flow is paramount. And so now that I'm sufficiently tired of looking at this page, let's see how these techniques are implemented in other parts of the story.
Okay.
Like Goku versus Vegeta is an obvious place to start, if not extremely irritating one for me. Not because it's a bad example of what I want to demonstrate here, but because the fight is so blindingly brilliant in its composition, execution, and storytelling that focusing on just the flow of a couple of the pages alone is kind of like bringing a tiger to show and tell in order to talk about why your favorite color is orange. Kind of overdoes it. In the same way the prior example with Goku Genkidama placed an emphasis on hands, this places the focus on the positioning of Goku and Vegeta on the page, vying for top spot, if you will, both metaphorically and quite literally. Notice how on that famous pose off, Vegeta is the one positioned highest on the panel, being the only one not boxed into the page. He's off the charts. Goku is a known quantity, but Vegeta is something else entirely that cannot be contained by the panels here. There's some great flow on this page too, with our eyes naturally guided back and forth between the two fighters. Vegeta, Goku, Vegeta, Goku, Vegeta, Goku, etc. It creates this wonderful sense of timing and tension in this standoff as we wait for things to kick off. Furthermore, nice strong stance from Vegeta too, and by the end of this first flurry, Goku is the one thrown off balance, with Vegeta never looking more comfortable, standing upright still, and as you might have noticed, still atop the rock formation looking down on Goku. That is until Goku starts to push back. And notice here how Vegeta's once confident and stable stance is compromised as he looks at Goku.
Yeah, so now it's not vertical, it's on an angle, and you get that uncomfortableness from, with the whole triangle thing.
Now taking the shape of a storm. And it pays off with the first meaningful hit received by Vegeta. Note how because of that aura Toriyama gave Goku, he now has a visual toy to play with that helps guide our eyes from panel to panel, and additionally, within the existing panel to create a sense of movement. Finally, Vegeta, almost brought to his knees in the process and terrified to look weak, jumps back to a higher position in order to regain his footing. And look, a little bit of moment-to-moment paneling to emphasize what this moment means to Vegeta. A snapshot in time emphasized for the purpose of adding drama to the moment. This one look tells us everything we need to know. He is pissed. And just to put a pin on this section once and for all, if you go back and look at those scary ink blotch monsters, you'll find that many of them correspond to Toriyama's designs because he's a great visual communicator. So yeah, that was sequencing. Time to move on to
What we got?
part 3.
Rhythm. Love that. Do you know what? I still to this day have not seen Spider-Man 3, and I'm quite happy about it because I've heard nothing but bad things about Spider-Man 3.
See this picture? Yeah, it sucks. But here's the thing. When I took it, I thought this view was great. But when I looked at the photo I took, I was massively disappointed. Now, here's that same picture again, only cropped. And suddenly, it sucks less. Why? Aside from the witchcraft that is art theory, this picture I took didn't look good because our disgusting human eyes work very differently to that of a camera lens. And please stay with me on this line of thought because I promise I'll bring it back to the laser aliens soon. The first image I took is essentially the exact view I had while standing taking the picture. From my eyes perspective, it was a cool view, but the picture didn't translate because an image taken on a camera cannot do what our eyes can. When we look towards something, our field of view is huge, but our eyes and brain isolate our points of interest or focus. Interestingly, this exact principle explains how shutter shades, while making you look exceptionally stupid, also work without obstructing our vision. And so, he says, leaning over a comically large piece of paper containing images of Japanese cartoons, as it happens, manga and broadly speaking comics tend to leverage a lot of the same principles and shots photographers and filmmakers utilize. To prove my point, here are a few that you may or may not be aware of. The establishing shot, a shot typically shared at the beginning of a scene that clearly shows the area the action is set. It's all over TV shows, films, anime, and yes, even in manga. Pick virtually any chapter in Dragon Ball, and unless we're embroiled in something rather specific, Toriyama makes sure to add some sort of establishing
So we
shots.
know where
Next up, the
everything
close-up.
is, yeah.
Possibly the most fundamental and foundational concept I'll touch on here, but also by virtue of that, the most important. Close-ups are exactly what they say on the tin. A shot framing the subject's face or point of interest, typically to emphasize a point, conviction, or expression key to the story. Next is the over-the-shoulder shot. A shot where the camera is positioned, say it with me now, over the shoulder of one of the subjects in the foreground, typically employed during a conversation to establish or imply a connection between the two sharing the scene, or in this case, page. This is opposed to a single shot, which implies distance. Deep focus. Toriyama loves using this one. He loves it, and to be quite honest, it's easy to see why. As a mangaka, Toriyama doesn't have the luxury of being able to move his camera in time with the actors on screen, and so he employs this technique regularly by keeping the foreground, middle ground, and background all in focus to create a sense of depth and life in his images. Next is a low angle shot, otherwise known as worm eye view. This shot is used to establish a sense of domineering power.
Yes, it's dominating. Yes, look at that. He is absolutely dominating that. Like, yeah, higher up, it's an intimidating shot.
Authority and or control for the subject in the frame. And wonderfully, whenever you look back through the series for intimidating scenes with the likes of Cell, Frieza, or Vegeta, oftentimes they can be found framed as such. And finally, just for the sake of this video, high angle shot, otherwise known as a downward shot or bird's eye view. In some sense, this shot, similarly but opposite to the low angle shot, is a presentation technique that looks down on a character or subject, often isolating them in the frame, sometimes to make them appear weak, small, or overwhelmed. There are of course dozens of different types of shots, some of which apply to comics, but many others that do not. Dolly shots, pan and zooms, tilt shots, steadicam, handycam, tracking shots, and there are many, many more, but you get the point. All of those require a sense of motion to be experienced by the viewers in order to be effective. However, this isn't to suggest that comics don't also possess the ability to do things that TV and film otherwise can't do. And this is where rhythm comes in, and it's honestly kind of cool, so stick with me here. You see, in a movie or each shot of a film, it's more often than not meant to be seen or understood in its entirety as you look at it. Within a given frame, everything we see is taking place simultaneously. Time flows at the same rate as it does for us at home. This is not true for comics, at least not in the same way. Things do not happen simultaneously on a panel. Let that sink in. Thinking about it for a few moments, this should be quite obvious. The very nature of speech bubbles and conversations occurring within a single panel suggest a presence or passing of time that is confined to a single panel. Check out this panel taken from Goku's interaction with Berter. As many of you are aware, or perhaps you're not, manga doesn't read left to right like Western comics. Instead, it reads right to left. Concerningly, because I've now...
Which confuses so many people whenever I'm out and about in public and just reading a manga. They're like, why are you reading that backwards? I am not, I assure you.
Read so much manga, I now open all books that I start with from the back. My idiocy is...
I do that as well. If I get like an actual like Western written book, I firstly, and then I'm like, oh wait.
Side, however, because manga is read or interpreted right to left, if more than one character or event occupies the space of a given panel, that means that the character or event or object on the rightmost of the panel is seen or acting first chronologically. Similarly, as we move our eyes leftwards and encounter the next object, that is seen as acting second, and so on. For instance, the first object in this case is Berter, exclaiming at the top of his lungs his befuddlement as to how someone like Goku, a Saiyan, could be so fast. This signals to us that what he noticed and exclaims occurs chronologically before Goku's response, which wouldn't make any sense if this panel was to be understood as all occurring at the same time. In other words, Berter says something, Goku responds to it, and the time that it takes for that interaction to take place is the amount of time that this panel exists within. And this isn't limited to conversations, but instead pieces of information. Whether they be Ginyu shocked as he reads Goku's growing scouter readings, or a Super Saiyan Goku raising his hand to Frieza, and Frieza simply noticing in shock without a word. This is all to say that unlike film, which presents a frame as a passing instance in time, the contents of which all happen simultaneously, comics, or in this case manga, demonstrate panels with chronological pieces of information that communicate a certain amount of time passing in order for the information to be delivered. Each panel has a focal point or a series of focal points that we move one to the next from. For the sake of simplicity, let's call these sections or pieces of information beats, as they make up the rhythm of these stories. Whether they be actions, gestures, expressions, or speech bubbles, each of these represent a single beat in the rhythm of the story being told. Interestingly, and this brings us back to the cinematic cinematic shot we touched on earlier. Since there are significant differences in how both comics and films are depicted, this you would think would result in certain techniques and the effects found therein not really being an option in the utility belt of a savvy mangaka or comic book artist. And again, how wrong you are. Take the panning shot, for example. This is a shot where the camera moves continuously right to left or left to right, depending on the context of the scene. In this clip from Whiplash, it's used to establish a connection between the tyrannical Terence Fletcher and his protege, Andrew. It's a technique you would think would be impossible to use in the realm of comics, but due to the concept of beats and rhythm in your panels, there are ways to mimic the effects of this shot normally found in film with them. Because information is segmented across a panel, when the panel itself contains a number of different beats, whether they be actions or different speech bubbles, specifically if they're from the same person, this helps to establish the passage of time. For instance, this panel with Vegeta pleading with Goku illustrates a comic's ability to achieve some of the same effects a panning shot offers a film. Notice how the speech bubbles aren't all crammed together. Instead, they are separated across the length of the page. Each bubble pushing farther and farther to the left of the page, signifying the passage of time and pauses between the different chunks of the conversation. Furthermore, the shape of this panel helps to get this slow delivery across too. Horizontal panels that stretch across the full width of the page are seen as lasting the greatest amount of time. Heck, even without words, it can be effective in delivering this sense that we are to linger on this shot just that little bit longer than the others. Check this one out. As Vegeta draws his final breath and delivers his last plea, suddenly he's gone. With that panel, he's presented in almost insisting upon us spending more time with than any other panel on the page. There's a pause, one that even the anime reflects. The same effect, of course, can also be observed with vertically tall panels. Usually these are used to introduce a character or highlight something about them, be it their appearance or conviction, as is the case in Dragon Ball. And again, this can be seen as quite similar to a tilt shot from film. There are, of course, more complicated examples, but if this interests you, I highly recommend you check out the books I pointed to in this video if you want to learn more. And on that note, we finally arrive at the final stop of this overly descriptive and honestly pedantic look at the theory behind comic and manga design. And that final stop is...
What was that? Jesus! You're a fucking miserable drunk.
Part 4. Focus.
Okay.
We've spent a great deal of time so far examining illustrations and the panels that contain them. And by we, I mean me. I've done all the work. You've just kind of been sitting there. Bit lazy. So it's now time for some crowd participation, and you will be participating in this short test, or should I say study. And this one is rather famous, so if you've seen this before, sit tight, but if it's your first time, I want you to try and count the number of times the players in white pass this basketball.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
How many did
13.
you count? The answer
I think it's about 14 though. I think I missed one.
is 15, but did you notice the gorilla? If this was your first time seeing this visual trick, there's a chance you might have missed him while focusing your attention elsewhere. But why does this happen? According to Will Storr's book, The Science of Storytelling, as people, our perception of the world is a limited hallucination composed of ever-changing pieces of information. Information that's informed by our ability to focus. And understanding why this works not only helps us structure great stories, but also great surprises and effective dialogue. Take this scene from chapter 390, for example. Goku and Gohan have made their exit from the time chamber. In the manga, we're not given a tremendous amount of time in the chamber itself, but all the focus from the team and us as readers is placed squarely on Goku. After a spirited scene where Goku states he won't be going back in because he doesn't need to, Vegeta deciding to tease him about his weakness, and then Goku saying that he's a lot stronger than even he, we get this scene in Korin Tower where Goku reveals half of his power. And after this bombastic outing, nestled in the lower right corner is a panel containing Gohan's internal monologue. In it, he says, "That's funny. That can't be Dad's full strength." With the power of hindsight being 20/20, we of course know that this is a clear hint to where the story is going, but watching it for the very first time, following a scene where Goku verbally alphas the insecure and evidently weaker Vegeta, all contained in a story that has up until this point been all about Goku, we of course interpret Gohan's words here to mean that Goku is hiding more power than he otherwise is letting on. And I mean, he's still not wrong. I mean, he is hiding power, just not in himself. However, despite illustration and composition being the focus of this video, I'd like to chat briefly about the importance of dialogue, premise, and the concept of show don't tell as it pertains to comics in general, because a lot of people don't fully understand what show don't tell actually means in an academic sense. One might think a rule like show don't tell might be as simple as what it says on the tin, but if that were true, then the best Disney film ever created would be something like Fantasia, considering there's virtually no dialogue to speak of. It's all show and no tell. But this is obviously wrong because the best Disney movie is WALL-E. Apologies to both Fantasia fans out there. This is all to say, of course, that dialogue isn't bad and expository dialogue isn't bad either.
When I did my media degree, I always was taught that, like, if you can portray a story without having to explain it and they can see it, then that is good storytelling.
And furthermore,
So I would always, when I did my old YouTube sketches, try and have as much show don't tell moments as I could. But obviously, when you're writing comedy, sometimes you need like the dialogue as well. At times, if there's a joke being made. But then visual gags work like that as well.
no dialogue can still be terrible. Panning a camera across a mantelpiece that covers the lives of two men as they go from school to boot camp to fatherhood isn't showing either. That's telling, but another form of it. It's replacing what would otherwise be filmmaking with a home movie. And famously, Akira Toriyama wrote his story with little planning for the future. This is to say that he never planned for the series to end up where it ultimately did, or take the course it ultimately took. He simply made it up as he went along. So how did he navigate this potential problem? Well, in The Art of Dramatic Writing by, and I'm going to butcher this name, Lejos Egri, I don't know. He says that not knowing how your story is going to end is perfectly fine, but what is vital to your story is a premise, a brief sentence that sums up the overall message of your story. Things like true progression comes through struggle, or deceit will lead to downfall, are examples of a premise. And what drives premise? It's not dialogue, it's your cast, or more specifically, character. If Goku were to show up and suddenly start narrating his life story for the purpose of filling other characters in, or worse again, for the purposes of filling us in on information, that would feel exceptionally strange.
Yeah, I see where it's going. So, because we know what Goku's character is like, we know how he acts, and it makes sense.
Wouldn't it? Because that choice of speech doesn't ring true to Goku as an established character. Or most characters for that matter, unless you're talking about Forrest Gump, and his eagerness to tell his life story is used as a framing device for the film. I mean, who am I to argue with 6 Academy Awards? But the point is, exposition is difficult and boring to make it feel natural. For instance, the conversation Trunks has with Goku when he returns to Earth is natural. His motivations are clear and Goku's willingness to engage with a harmless, strong person all checks out. Therefore, the conversation takes place. The contents of which happen to be interesting in that it pushes towards the premise of the story and sets up the coming arc. However, Toriyama is faced also with a problem immediately after. No one else heard that conversation in canon besides Trunks and Goku, and technically Piccolo. So how does Toriyama solve that problem? Well, he simply skips over it in one panel, citing Piccolo filled everyone in on the important information. But what happens when you're backed into a corner? What happens when Toriyama writes Trunks versus Cell? In this, you have the debut of a new Super Saiyan power-up, but the wielder doesn't understand why it isn't working against his adversary. So how did Toriyama work around this problem without Trunks having to verbally diarrhea out his mouth the explanation to us as readers? Well, needless to say, he didn't do that. Instead, he cuts away to Goku, simultaneously discovering this technique, informing us, telling us in a way true to his character why this form doesn't work. And this is natural because he's not only training himself, he's training Gohan, and Gohan asks why. However, this isn't always the case, and there are of course instances where plot device characters have to exposit to Goku in order for him to help out. Instances like Snow's backstory that inspires Goku to fight the Red Ribbon Army, or Guru who serves to piece together the history of that story for the main cast, or even Shin who serves to recruit the forces of Earth in the fight against Boo. All of these characters tell a hell of a lot more than they otherwise show. They don't even feel like characters most of the time if you're being completely honest. So why is it presented to us this way? Well, because the story of Dragon Ball isn't about any of these individuals. These are glorified plot devices used to propel the story forwards and to reinforce the premise. In the Red Ribbon Army arc, what's important with Snow is not understanding the fear and pain that girl felt or the anxiety she feels feels about what will become of her village. What's important is seeing how the main character Goku reacts when confronted with this situation she offers him. Or in the case of Guru, he's there to provide a path for the supporting cast to enhance their power through cooperation. And for Shin, he's there similarly to Sona to present Goku and the others with yet another big bad to stop. Unless you're an enormous fan of the franchise, it's not beyond reproach to suggest that these characters are quite one-dimensional or unexplored, and you know, I think that's a good thing.
Well, yeah, you don't want to have too much given to us. Like, Goku's the main character.
A character that doesn't reinforce the central premise is as good as set dressing. They don't need exploration, they simply exist to set up the main character to show what he's made of.
Yeah.
Now, this is of course a difficult balance to strike when writing your story. Famously, One Piece loves to flesh out a ton of its characters, but
Yeah.
you'll notice that every
Jesus.
single character that is fleshed out in One Piece reinforces the premise of that arc or greater story in some shape
Yeah,
or form.
man.
You'll rarely find Oda writing about something that straight up doesn't matter to the story for very long. So while keeping all of that in mind, let's take a look back at Goku and Gohan during the Cell Saga as they first enter the chamber. Only this time armed with the hindsight that Gohan is the main character, and how a competent writer uses exposition and dialogue to express information to the audience and in a fashion that helps to communicate that very main character shift. Chapter 377. For all intents and purposes, despite Vegeta and Trunks having gone into the chamber before them, and interestingly, Goku is a supporting character used to exposit information about the chamber to Gohan and by proxy us. Unlike Goku, this is both Gohan and our first time in the chamber proper. Goku explains where everything is, what the challenges are, and even tells us that he wasn't able to last longer than a month here as a kid. And this is just another thing for Gohan to surpass. This scene places us in the same shoes as Gohan. We are learning here from Goku. We aren't experiencing this for the first time through Goku's eyes, we're experiencing it for the first time through Gohan's. And this is all telling and not showing in a literal sense. But as Robert McKee writes in his book Story, show, don't tell isn't about telling or showing, ironically enough, but instead it's about the characters behaving in a truthful way. Does it make sense for Goku to reveal this information to his son he's about to train with? Of course, he's his father and Gohan is obviously confused. And so I ask, would it have been better if Toriyama drew this information instead of telling us this information? In short, no. But if you don't want to take my word for it, pick up any of the books I've referenced in this video, and they might explain what I've asserted in greater detail. Oh, also, before I sign off, I'd like to extend a special thank you to my friend Manuela, who helped me with this video. She's written a great blog on this very topic, and I've linked her socials in the description down below. She helped with this video, so send her some love. Next week, I begin my review of Dragon Ball Z, so subscribe if you want to see that. But as for this video, it's been long enough and my legs are tired from standing, so goodbye.
Sick, so we're getting the Dragon Ball Z reviews. Sick. Oh, we're checking those out as they come out. That's going to be freaking cool because he's reviewed everything else. He's even reviewed Dragon Ball, he's done GT, Super, you know. Alright. See, that was really educational. I learned some stuff there, like, you know. That was boss. So, yeah, make sure you check out my Etsy shop. Links in the description to t-shirts and hoodies that I've designed. And thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is our support channel. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you guys for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys, all you guys, next time.